Hey there, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of the podcast, a joint creation between Why Music Matters and the Buffalo History Museum. This episode, which we've named 12-8-80 in the name of love, was created with my good friend, Anthony Greco, Director of Exhibits at the Buffalo History Museum, and creator and host of the museum's podcast. It explores an evening that changed the world for the worse. And it turns out that there's an interesting Buffalo angle to the story of this tragic night. On December 8, 1980, as a then unknown band called U2 played to a sparse crowd while opening for Talas at Stage 1 just outside of Buffalo, the world was upended by the murder of John Lennon. Lennon's death transformed an ordinary evening into a defining moment in music and cultural history. This episode tells the story of that night. I'd like to thank Anthony Greco for his outstanding work on this joint venture. And shout-outs are in order to Willie Nile and Billy Sheehan, both of whom were kind enough to share their memories of that fateful evening with me. Additional thanks to WKBW in Buffalo, who shared with us an excerpt of their 2017 interview with Bruce Moser, a Buffalo promoter and dear friend who played a significant role in breaking U2 in the American Northeast way back in 1980. Bruce passed away in 2020. This joint podcast is dedicated to his memory, with thanks for all he gave to Buffalo and to the world. We all miss you, Bruce. Thanks for joining us for this special podcast. Take it away, Anthony Greco.
It's late in the afternoon on Monday, December 8th, 1980. As people head home from work, the city is already wrapped in darkness and cold. The streets are damp with freezing rain, reflecting the rippling glow of Christmas lights in their pothole puddles. You can hear the muffled hum of traffic, the hiss of metro buses, and the crunch of salt under boots as people hurry to get out of the wind. From the radios and passing cars, local DJs pushed the day's heavy rotations. The Stones, Benatar, Zeppelin. Springsteen's River album had just come out a few weeks earlier, and Hungry Heart was inescapable, as was Just Like Starting Over by former Beatle John Lennon. His latest album, Double Fantasy, had just been released November 17th. It was his first album in 5 years, and that song was getting a heavy push. For most people, it's just another Monday night in Buffalo. Conversations about yesterday's Bills win over the Rams had echoed through offices, bars, and living rooms all day. With just 2 games left in the season, the team had a narrow lead in the division over the Patriots, who they'd play next week. But tonight, on Monday Night Football, the Pats were set to face Miami, Buffalo's bitter longtime rival. Western New Yorkers gathered in front of their TVs conflicted. We can't root for New England, right? We need to win the East, but then again, can we actually cheer for Miami, the team that's rolled us for the past decade? Meanwhile, far away in another part of town, a young band from Ireland called U2 is arriving at a tiny venue called Stage 1. It's located in Clarence, an affluent suburb of Buffalo, a half-hour northeast of the city. They're nobodies here, a curiosity, promoting their debut album and opening for Buffalo's hometown rock band, Talas. No one has even the faintest sense that the world is about to fracture. That people in Western New York, across the country, and around the world will remember exactly where they were a few hours from now. The soundtrack of an entire generation is about to shatter. Back at stage one, none of U2's four members had even reached the age of 21. Two of them, drummer Larry Mullen Jr. and lead guitarist David Howell Evans, better known as The Edge, were only 19. Still, the group was on their first international tour, promoting their debut album, Boy, which had been released just weeks earlier. It was local promoter Bruce Moser that had booked the gig. He put together a leg of the tour, 10 stops between Cleveland and Boston, at the request of the band's manager, Paul McGuinness. McGuinness wanted to do some shows outside of Ireland so that the band could get a better feel for the US. A staple on the local music scene, Moser had been a supporter of the band from the very beginning. An article in the Buffalo News by music writer Jeff Myers noted that he was turned on to the fledgling Irish quartet by then-friend and future wife Mary Martin. Martin had been working at Play It Again, Sam on Buffalo's Elmwood Avenue, and was so taken by an import copy of the band's debut that she was offering a money-back guarantee to anyone who purchased it. Moser began talking up U2 to anyone and everyone he encountered. There was just one problem.
They're one of the biggest bands in the world, which might make it hard to believe that at one point U2 had just a handful of fans show up to see them when they played their first Buffalo show in 1980.
Here, Moser recalls the show.
They were opening for a Buffalo band, Talas, and there were actually 8 people there to see the band.
Around 10 p.m., the stage announcer introduced the fresh-faced quartet. Ladies and gentlemen, V2. The venue that Moser booked, Stage 1, was a small venue and well outside the Buffalo city limits. It was owned by Harvey and Corky Productions, a legendary concert promotion duo that shaped much of the region's live music scene in the 1970s and early 1980s. The Corky of the duo was Horace Corky Berger, a former student at the University of Buffalo. That's where he met future partner Harvey Weinstein. Yes, that Harvey Weinstein. If a major rock act came through Western New York, chances are Harvey and Corky were behind it. The powerhouse team turned Buffalo into a legitimate stop on the national touring circuit. From the Stones to Sinatra, they filled arenas and theaters with the sounds of a generation. As U2's first chords ring out in Clarence, across the state, John Lennon is on his way back to the Dakota, an apartment building overlooking Central Park where he's lived for the past few years. The former Beatles been at the Record Plant recording studio about 10 minutes away, doing the final mixes for his wife, Yoko Ono's song, Walking on Thin Ice. In less than an hour, the news that will stop conversations mid-sentence and freeze Western New Yorkers in front of their TVs is about to break. Lennon's schedule that day had been packed wall to wall. We woke up to a shiny blue sky spreading over Central Park, Yoko Ono recalled. The day had an air of bright eyes and bushy tails. But the calm was soon filled with activity. Breakfast at Café La Fortuna, a quick haircut, and then a photo shoot with legendary photographer Annie Leibovitz for the cover of next month's Rolling Stone magazine. That shoot would produce perhaps the most iconic images in music history. A nude Lennon in a fetal position, embracing a clothed Yoko and kissing her cheek. Following the shoot, it was downstairs to Yoko's office where John would do an interview with David Sholin of RKO Radio. "I hope I die before Yoko," Lennon confessed to Sholin, "because if Yoko died, I wouldn't know how to survive. I couldn't carry on. As the RKO team packed up their gear and headed for their car, John and Yoko asked if they could hitch a ride over to the record plant. As they strolled out from under the Dakota's porte cochere, he autographed a copy of his latest album, Double Fantasy, for a young man. He took the album, scribbled John Lennon, 1980, and snapped a photo with the fan before asking him if there was anything else that he wanted, before climbing into the car. Once they arrived at the studio, Lennon and Ono went upstairs to the mixing room and began putting the finishing touches on Walking on Thin Ice, on which John had also played guitar. But they weren't the only ones at the record plant that evening. Just below them, a 32-year-old singer-songwriter named Willie Nile was working through some tracks for his second album, Golden Dawn. Nile, a Buffalo native, had made a name for himself playing around Greenwich Village in the late 1970s. After being discovered by a New York Times music critic, he signed with Clive Davis and Arista Records. Nile knew full well who else was at the record plant that night. His co-producer, Tom Panunzio, had told him a few days earlier that Lennon was in the building and asked Willie if he'd like to meet him. Panunzio had worked with Lennon in the past, as well as other big names like Springsteen and Patti Smith. Wanting to get a few nights of recording under his belt, Nile suggested they instead wait a few days. Maybe Tuesday night, he told Panunzio. Nile and his band worked through the weekend, and then on Sunday night, December 7th, he got an unexpected phone call.
We recorded Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday night, the phone rings in the studio at midnight. And it was, we're recording basic tracks, and it was John Lennon's engineer. I was in Studio A and playing a piano that John played many, many times. He was in the mix room upstairs. John Lennon's engineer called to say that John was out of guitar strings, and did we have some that he could use?
Nile and his team were surprised by the call as well as excited. He thought about writing a message to John.
I gathered guitar strings, sent them up. I was going to put a note to John, thanks for all the music, I love you. And I thought, it's corny, I'll tell him when I see him on Tuesday.
After sending the strings to John, Nile kept recording, not leaving the studio until 2 a.m. He returned the next day, Monday, December 8th, around 4:30. Lennon's engineer told Nile that John had played on those strings from midnight to about 4 a.m.
If you listen to the guitar on Walking on Thin Ice, it's a searing, badass, raw as hell. It's John Lennon really wailing. It's the last thing he ever recorded.
At about 10:30 that evening, the phone in Nile's studio rang again. Tom Panunzio answered the phone and said, "I'll be right out." Unbeknownst to Nile, a buddy of Tom's had been bugging him to get an autograph from Lennon. Tom had relayed the message upstairs saying, "The guy who gave you the strings would like an autograph." Willie still has a copy of it to this day.
I got a copy of the autograph. It said, "To Ken, who strung me along." They strung me along, Peace of Love, John Lennon, 1980, and drew a picture of his face. That was 5 minutes before I was murdered. Because the phone call was that John was coming down in the elevator, Tom, meet me downstairs, and I'll give you the autograph. So it was the last autograph John Lennon ever gave.
Minutes later, at 10:51 p.m., Lennon was shot outside the Dakota by a troubled 25-year-old named Mark David Chapman, the same man for whom Lennon autographed an album earlier that day. When Nile heard the news, he, like so many around the world, was in disbelief.
The ninja comes in 15 minutes later and said, "Somebody just shot John. John just left the studio." And I thought, "John who?" Didn't make any sense. He said, "John Lennon." I go, "What? What do you mean somebody shot John Lennon?" And he said, "A friend of Yoko's just called saying John just got shot and they're rushing him to the hospital." And we couldn't record anymore, and it was earth-shattering, like to so many.
To this day, he thinks about that night and what, if anything, could have altered the course of history.
If I could find a time machine and go back in time, I'll often ask that. Where would you go back? I'll ask people, where would you go back if you could go back in time? Well, the first place I'd go back would be to the record plant on the night of December 8th, 1980. And I would, I would change the events that happened. It's a huge loss for the human race. And so it's a sad, Monday will be a sad day. I'll raise a glass to toast John,
Over the next hour, word of the tragic event spread across the country, from crowded bars to living rooms and to a small club in Clarence. It was Howard Cosell of ABC that broke the news to the nation. He'd been handed the update with only seconds left in the Monday Night Football game. As Patriots kicker John Smith lined up for a 35-yard field goal to potentially win the game, Cosell broke in with the news, his unmistakable voice and staccato rhythm, adding a heavy authenticity to the words. His broadcast partner, Frank Gifford, nudged the reluctant Cosell. "Howard, you've got to say what we know in the booth." "Yes, we have to say it," Cosell readied himself. "Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses." An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all the Beatles. Shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that news flash, which, being duty-bound, we have to take. By the time that word of Lennon's death made it to stage 1, U2 had finished their set, passing the spotlight to Talas, the established hometown band. With their work for the night finished, Bono and the others blended into the sparse crowd, and that's when they heard. Here's promoter Bruce Moser.
After the show, the only video game at that time was Pong, so my wife was playing Pong with Bono, and some drunk guy came up and pushed his way between them and said, "Hey man, did you hear John Lennon just got shot?" And Bono turned around and goes, "That's a sick joke."
When word finally got to Talas on stage, they reacted by performing a set of the Beatles tunes that they'd grown up revering as a tribute to Lennon. Here's Talas bassist Billy Sheehan recalling that night.
So we just got up and, did It's a Hard Day's Night and Help and 8 Days a Week and all the songs that we still know by heart, of course. And we could see in the crowd as it filtered through the information that we'd lost John Lennon. It was a tough time. And I remember going home and watching one of the Beatles movies, the archival movie about their life and times. One of the famous ones, I forgot which one it was. But I cried like a baby at the end of that, losing John Lennon, because I knew we would never have the band that launched 10 million careers. And that was one of the most devastating losses for me in my life.
The next morning, December 9th, felt different the moment people opened their eyes. Across the country, radios clicked on, and instead of morning show chatter, listeners were met with Lennon's voice, soft, familiar, and suddenly heavier. Imagine, in my life, watching the wheels, the songs that had always felt like companions now sounded like goodbyes. Newspapers that were supposed to be filled with holiday ads and box scores all carried the same headline. Generation mourns slain ex-Beatle, read the Buffalo News. Commuters stood frozen at newsstands, just staring, longing for yesterday. Fans lined up outside record stores, waiting to reconnect with the albums they'd grown up with. And DJs struggled to keep their emotions from cracking on the air. In city after city, people gathered, sometimes formally, sometimes without even knowing why. A few candles on a sidewalk turned into vigils. A couple dozen voices singing "Give Peace a Chance" swelled into hundreds. In New York, outside the Dakota, Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder in the cold, listening to Lennon's music spill from boomboxes and open windows. Some sang along. Others simply stood there, stuck in a moment that they weren't ready to leave. Across the nation, December 9th became one of those rare days when everyone seemed to move a little slower, speak a little softer, and feel something together. It wasn't just that a famous musician had died, it was the sense that a thread running through the last 20 years of American life had suddenly snapped. A voice that had challenged, comforted, questioned, and imagined something better was suddenly gone. And so, as the world tried to make sense of that loss, people did the only thing that they could. They listened to the songs, to the stories, to each other, all in the name of love. Just one day earlier, a young band from Dublin had played to 8 people in a small club outside Buffalo. A few hours later, the world had changed. But that's the thing about nights like that. You never know, as you're living in them, which parts will fade into the background and which parts will follow you for the rest of your life. Because history doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a glistening puddle on a Buffalo street, in a nearly empty club on the edge of town, or hand in hand with the one you love. And other times it arrives all at once, leaving the world a little quieter and reminding us of how fragile every ordinary night can be. Happy Christmas, everyone. Today's episode of the Buffalo History Museum podcast was written by me, Anthony Greco, and produced in collaboration with writer and musician Jeff Myers. Jeff was a huge help in creating the content and getting the sound bites used in the episode. He also produced the music at the beginning and the end. That's him on guitar. If you're a Buffalo music fan, I'd encourage you to listen to his podcast, Why Music Matters. As always, thank you for listening, and if you like the show, please take a minute and leave a rating and review. And of course, tell your family and friends. The Buffalo History Museum receives operating support from Erie County, the City of Buffalo, the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature. Additional support is provided by M&T Bank and from our donors, members, and friends.